have Ingwan Che. So this is a very special interview for me. So everybody make sure you're paying attention, taking notes. This is going to be very helpful. So first, I just want to say, Ingwan, I appreciate you joining.
Yeah, thanks for making the time as well.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Yeah. So I first wanted to start off really get into a little background about yourself. So can you just tell a little bit about yourself, your background, and where you're from?
Yeah, sure. My name's Ingwan. I'm originally from Houston, Texas. Uh, I I've had a little bit of international experience. So I grew up in Houston. My parents and my family moved back to Korea in middle school, where I'm originally. My parents are both from, and then I came back to the United States for high school. I studied math and economics at MIT for college, and then my first job out of college, I spent 5 years working for a Wall Street bank called Morgan Stanley, where I was on the sales and trading teams. I remember my first job was, um, uh, you know, everyone starts from somewhere, and so my first job at Morgan Stanley was making a lot of calls to, hedge fund managers to solicit business and things like that. So, yeah, I remember my first 6 months on the job was a lot of cold calling and reaching out and kind of learning about sales that way. After about 5 years working at Morgan Stanley, I left to go work for some tech companies. So in 2019, I moved to a company called Verkada, which sells physical security products. So think cameras, access control, intrusion alarm systems to businesses. Um, and I worked in the sales operations, revenue operations, and demand generation teams there. Um, After about 2 years there, I left to be the head of growth at a cloud cybersecurity company called Wiz. And after about a year at Wiz, I left to start Glencoco.
Okay, perfect. And before we get more into Glen Coco, can you tell us a little bit more about that Morgan Stanley experience and your more technical roles, and then how you feel like that experience and those transferable skills led you to do what you do now?
Yeah, I would say I loved my time at Morgan Stanley. It's probably one of the most competitive companies to get a job at. The way they typically recruit is they won't hire anyone outside of like target schools, which are basically like the Ivy Leagues, MIT and Stanford, and then a couple other sort of like top, 50 universities. Even then, the recruiting process is incredibly competitive. So typically, the way you get a job, if you haven't previously had experience in the industry, is you do what are called summer internships. And summer internship recruiting is competitive even within target schools. Not everyone gets an internship, so it's competitive within the schools. Once you get the job, have you ever seen the movie Hunger Games?
Yeah, I love that movie.
Yeah, so it's summer internships at Wall Street banks are a little bit like Hunger Games in the sense that they actually will hire like, you know, 50 to 60 interns, and they only really have spots for full-time offers for 30 or 40 sort of like actual candidates.
Mm,
What they'll do is they'll intentionally overhire summer interns, knowing that they kind of have to fight it out and compete against each other to win out and get a full-time offer. And you're going up against, some of the top you know candidates from top schools, so it's a very sort of competitive job. uh, a lot of it, you have to do a lot of networking. You have to be the first one in the office and the last person out of the office. um, so I was fortunate enough to have a good summer internship and get a full-time offer, um, on a team that I liked at Morgan Stanley. And so that was my first kind of experience, kind of learning what it's like to kind of, have a competitive job market and kind of, compete and win, and get a job. I would say the 5 years that I spent at Morgan Stanley were very formative. It's a pretty brutal job. interestingly enough, everyone talks about how you get paid a lot if you work in finance or you work on Wall Street. But if you actually calculate the number of hours you're working compared to how much you're getting paid, the hourly wages actually end up being very similar to working at McDonald's. So what I mean
I
by
believe
that is
it.
might be making six figures, but just out of college, like 100K or whatever the amounts are, but you're expected to work like 80 to 100-hour work weeks. So if you think about it, like, most people work a 9 to 5, so it's 40 hours a week. When you're working 80 to 100 hours a week,
Wow.
suddenly, if you were to compare like working at McDonald's where you're getting paid, $20 an hour, or let's say you get paid like 50K a year working in some sort of role at a regular job, um, you're only working 40 hours a week. If you're working 80 to 100 hours a week, but you're getting paid 100K on a per hourly basis, which one actually is more lucrative?
Right. And I actually used
So
to work. My fault, I didn't mean to
yeah,
interrupt you.
no. But I bring this up mostly to illustrate that when I was first starting out, even though I was getting paid, six figures, I was actually working 80 to 100 hours a week, because that was what's kind of culturally expected at the company. And so it was a tough job, but I would say for certain types of people that are, viewing jobs not as sort of paychecks to take home, but investment opportunities to invest in personal growth and personal development. There's no substitute to working for like a top company or a top organization where you learn in the early days, and everything that you do and all the blood, sweat, and tears that you put in the early days actually will pay huge dividends down the line from a career perspective. So your original question was, how was my experience at Morgan Stanley, and like how did it translate to, later career opportunities? I would say very brutal, very high stress. Um, when you make mistakes, some of these mistakes are hundreds of thousands of dollars cost to the firm. But it kind of foundationally set me up for the kind of work ethic and the mentality that made me a good candidate for future companies and future job offers.
I love that. I love that. And I like the Hunger Games reference as well. And me personally, I don't work so many jobs. I know a lot of people, they might only work two, three jobs. I started off, I was a lifeguard. Then I was Qdoba. I worked at Chick-fil-A. I worked at like 10 different warehouse jobs. I was a server. I was a manager at a pizza place. I worked at the valet restaurants. So that's what I was going to say when you was talking about if you were working 40 hours making 50,000. I was making around 40, 50 working at a pizza place as a manager. And I just had manager experience and just got the first manager job I can get. And I had my feet up eating free food, drinks, and it wasn't any real stress to it. So I definitely feel like I like that comparison you made because I feel like tech sales in itself, I like the balance of quality of life, work-life balance, as well as fair compensation. So getting into Glencoco, let's say if people are not familiar with you or not familiar with the people that don't know about Glencoco, I have my own understanding of it, but can you just break it down as far as what Glen Coco is to start us off with?
Yeah, of course. So after about 3 years working for different tech companies, so after I left Morgan Stanley, I went to Ricotta and then I went to Wiz, and um, these are software and technology companies that sell to businesses, and every business needs sales reps. Um, and within sales, there's lots of different like job functions, right? Tech sales is just two words, the word tech and the word sales. But tech is a huge category and sales is also a huge category. So within the sales
Exactly.
role, there's lots of different types of roles in sales. So the first type of role is um, what you call sort of like a hunter. So a hunter is like a sales development rep or business development rep. And typically, because it's a tougher job and you're doing a lot of hunting and sort of like trying to find new business, a lot of cold calling, a lot of emailing. Typically, it's considered sort of a more sort of like entry level position. And basically, if you can kind of prove it out and prove that you're successful as a hunter, then you get to be sort of like a farmer. And a farmer is someone who basically the hunters will bring these leads, potential customers, and then account executives tend to be what are called closers. So closers will take these like potential customers that have interest and actually close deals. And so oftentimes the sales development rep job is a stepping stone to becoming an account executive. Being an account executive will typically pay a little bit better, but it's also a little bit more. There's a lot more complexity involved. You have to learn how to navigate deal cycles. Talk to multiple stakeholders at a company, be organized, be a sort of like project manager or consultant in some ways for the company as they're going about finding new business. But when I was at Ricotta and Wiz, we used to hire, big teams of SDRs and BDRs, sales development reps and BDRs. This is what Glencoco does. Um, um, and one of the challenges that we found at Ricotta and Wiz is, do you know the average tenure of a sales development rep or business development rep at tech companies? If you were to
I'm
guess,
actually,
like how
I'm, I'm actually so glad you asked me that because somebody told me it was 14 months, and I think I seen something else that said like 7 to 10 months.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you can slice and dice it different ways, but on average, the average tenure of a sales development rep or a business development rep is 6 to 9 months, which means that, like, if you think about that, that's kind of crazy. Like, statistically, every 6 to 9 months, on average, you're going to be looking for a new job. And the reason why is because sales development reps and business development reps are typically, most companies will employ sales development reps and business development reps through this like up or out model. So you remember how I was talking about Morgan Stanley, kind of my summer internship, and how it's like Hunger Games. It's very, very much a performance-based job. So if you can't put up meetings, if you can't generate pipeline, then they're quickly going to let you go. Or if you do a good job, they're going to quickly kind of promote you into different types of roles. Um, and and so when you think about a job function that's so high turnover and high churn, it causes a lot of issues. So for one thing, for companies are always having to spend time interviewing, recruiting, training, hiring SDRs and BDRs. And then every 6 to 9 months, they have to fire them and then do the same thing over and over and over again. So companies incur a lot of shadow costs and time, basically like having to spend resources on hiring, training, and then firing and then rehiring, SDRs and BDRs. For salespeople or people who are interested in being SDRs or BDRs, it's a tough job too, because you're always basically having to go through a bunch of interviews, like get rejected. It's a pretty, the nice thing about being a sales development rep or business development rep is you don't need technical skills. You don't need to be like an engineer. You just have to know how to talk to people and write emails and be able to do like account research and follow up, because the SDR's job is basically to schedule a bunch of meetings for companies and go find new customers. Now, we created Glencoco, and the easiest way to think about how Glencoco works is we're solving problems on both sides, for people and for you know SDRs who use Glencoco. So the way Glencoco works is it's sort of a fractional B2B sales marketplace. It's basically an Uber for fractional BDRs or SDRs. So basically, business to business companies can post what are called like bounties or payouts on our platform for how much they'd pay for someone generating a sales qualified meeting. And then contractors can sign up on our platform, go through online courses that we set up in our platform to learn about the company, how to pitch, talk tracks, cold call scripts. And then they can actually use our all-in-one dialing, emailing, list building platform to actually go and like source meetings for companies and get paid out in real time after companies meet with them. So it's kind of a two-sided marketplace where people who enjoy or are interested in sales development or the SDR job can basically go on Glencoco and actually get matched with real companies that are looking for meetings, and then get paid out for actually performing real sort of like SDR, BDR work.
I love it. I love it. And that's amazing. And the crazy part is, I didn't know that you get paid same day. This whole time I thought it was just like a regular job, like 2 weeks later. Same day payment makes it so much better because a lot of jobs that are commission only, people are kind of closed off to it, like, oh, I don't want commission only. But if you literally get paid right away, it's an amazing experience. And to be able to put Glencoco SDR on your LinkedIn and on your resume is huge, especially in a market that values work experience. So I want to take a quick step back in terms of how you were at Morgan Stanley. You said it was like Hunger Games, and then you were in like a operations role. How'd you go from that to like a head of sales, head of growth type of role?
Um, well, I ended up leaving Morgan Stanley to join a tech company because I was also kind of personally fascinated by what was happening with, I think a lot of really cool companies build some really exciting sort of products in the technology space. And so I kind of wanted to, shift away from a role in finance to actually sort of building things. The role that the company had in mind for me was a sales operations role when I first started out. So what is sales operations? The way to think about it is I like to use a lot of like military analogies. So if you think about
I love
sales
how
reps,
you I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I love how you be using the references and the analogies like the Hunger Games and the Uber of I like that a lot. I feel like that's high level talking when you're using that. Look, I'm sorry to
yeah, yeah,
interrupt you. Huh?
no problem, no problem. So the way to think about it is, if you're going out and fighting a war or a military campaign, you need soldiers, right? Foot soldiers, infantrymen, cavalry, tanks. So you can think about like SDRs and account executives as, foot soldiers or tank, people who are going out into the market and finding new customers and new business. Um, but just as in a military campaign or a war, you need like a central sort of like team of strategists who can basically be like, okay, well, this army unit needs to cross, to Europe, and so we need to provide ships for them to be able to easily like cross over from the U.S. into Europe, for example. Sales operations is sort of like the analogy of that in a sales organization where, they're responsible for, you know, figuring out what types of quotas to set for their reps. They're responsible for, okay, like this company is selling, security cameras to all kinds of businesses. So we need to figure out what sorts of job titles and contact lists that we need to give the sales rep so that they can go and like reach out to these folks to go and secure new business, right? So there's a lot of like data, list building, lead generation. Um, so I spent 6 months I was one of the first people on the sales operations team. At the time that I joined, the team was around 2 people. Now it's like, I've since left the company, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's, 50 people on that entire team now because it's grown. The company's grown from 150 people to 3,000 people. My first job was sort of, building a lot of like lead lists for reps to send out emails to and make calls to, like figuring out like comp structure and quota plans, analyzing the relative performance of different sorts of um, campaigns across different sorts of segments and markets, like what types of industries are most interested in using our product and kind of like figuring out strategy from there. Um, and naturally, if you think about a lot of those those functions that I described, they're pretty similar to growth and demand generation as well. Like in growth and demand generation, which is just another fancy word for like marketing, you have to understand who your customers are, what is the messaging you want to lead with and things like that. And so I kind of, when I joined Ricotta, it had always been sort of my goal to eventually have a go at starting my own sort of business. And so for me, my motivations when I was there wasn't necessarily to become like, a VP or sort of like a middle manager at the company and be there for a long time. It was just, hey, I want to spend as much time learning as much as possible across as many different sort of like industries and departments or different kind of departments at the company as possible. And so, um, after about 6 months kind of growing and scaling out the sales operations team, I kind of raised my hand and I was like, hey, I'd love to take on a new challenge at the company. And so I shifted over to the growth and demand generation team.
That was great. Now, so it's something they say, it's easy to say, but it's harder in theory. So, you started off as like the brains of the operation and then get into like a director of growth, head of growth type position, and then start your own company. So when it comes to getting promoted, let's say if somebody is currently in a position or trying to pivot, trying to get promoted, well, what do you feel like made you successful? And then what's your best advice you would give to somebody else that's trying to accomplish the same thing?
Yeah, I think there's really two components to um, being promoted. The first is let me take a step back. There's actually three components. The first is, does the company actually need to fill the role for like a promotion, right? So certain companies may not have the role that you're looking for available for you. Um, um, and that could be for a lot of reasons, like the company's too small, or maybe they want someone with a certain type of background or experience that you're, no matter how much time you spend, you're just not going to be able to have and fit those criteria. So the first thing is like, does the company actually have a role that you potentially could, get promoted into? That's a little bit outside of your control, although the way you can kind of control for that is to go to a company that has the kind of role you want, basically, right? If your current company doesn't have it. The second vector I would say that's important is, are you a top performer? Are you someone who has demonstrated in your current role that you are able to successfully execute on your KPIs and your mandates that you've been given, right? Because companies are going to promote people who, you know, um, who are able to actually put up and put up results and that are valuable for the business. Um, And then the third component is, are you someone who is able to build really good, healthy relationships with key stakeholders, at your company? Um, are you someone that's generally either well liked or really effective at your job and respected? Typically, when you're promoted, you're given more responsibilities, either in the form of managing teams or you just have more things that are mission critical for the business that you now own as a responsibility. And a big part of getting promoted is like the people at the top who are making those promotion decisions feeling comfortable with you being able to do that. And that comfortability oftentimes is going to be a function of your ability to effectively understand who the key stakeholders are who make that decision on the promotion, and building good relationships with them early on, like letting them be aware that you're interested in certain types of roles, you want to kind of grow and develop a career path that kind of makes sense for you. And so those are the three components, and executing into those three components is ultimately on kind of your responsibility. So if there isn't a role at the company that you're ultimately looking to go to, then it's your responsibility to either advocate for the creation of a role at the company or find another company that has the role and the career opportunity that you're looking for. On the second point, being someone who's able to actually perform in the current role that you have, that's up to you. That's your destiny, right? I've always taken a very first person in the office, last person out of the office kind of mentality to every sort of job and role that I've ever taken in my life. So, and this is something that's always driven me since I was a kid. Like when I was a kid, I hoop, I love basketball. But I used to stay until like I used to stay, even in middle school, like on campus until like 8 p.m. every day, um, shooting like free throws, right? Just because like I was so obsessed with the craft and getting better, and it was just something that like really drove me. Um, I think in sales, a big a big aspect of success is just, are you able to put in the hours and the effort and develop consistent, repeatable habits that make you successful? And I would say the reality is 80% of people talk the talk, but they don't actually walk the walk. So everyone will say, yeah, I want certain things. I consider myself the best. Like 80% of people think they're better than average. But if you think about it, mathematically, that makes no sense, because if 80% of people are better than average, then the math doesn't work out, because if you're better than average, you're in the top 50%. So the reality is a lot of people will think they are top performers, or they think they're good at their jobs and things like that. But in actuality, like, not everyone understands just how much work is required to become a top performer. And some people have it, some people don't. Some people can develop that skill set. There can be like a lot of triggers in life. Maybe like, the loss of a family member motivated someone to like really kind of rethink their life and get on the right track. Or someone who grew up in poverty had to kind of figure out how to survive and figure things out, and so that kind of motivates them, or they have to provide for their family. Some people, they're not really focused or prioritizing career habits and success in the beginning, and then they grow up and they mature and they realize, okay, this is something I want to really kind of like focus on. um, so that second component is just very innate. Like, are you able to really kind of become the best version of yourself and commit to that? And then the third part, I would say, which is mostly more around sort of like networking and finding the right stakeholders, is like, are you also investing time not just in yourself and your own performance, but also you know investing time in building relationships with your bosses or the people that would have an input in your promotion decision, so that you're likable or you're respected, and um, your stakeholders can make a case for why you should be promoted.
That's a great answer. And going back to something you said earlier, I like how you were saying that you don't need to be an engineer to do tech sales. So after I told you all the jobs that I worked, then I actually was able to get like a internship type of role where I was lead IT support, where basically it was just like a 1099 role where I was doing like I'm climbing up, fixing network adapters, and I'm little small technical issues, and people don't know how to hook up this, and so I'm like the IT man running around the school. But before I did that, I studied IT. I got my bachelor's in IT, and that's when I really learned like, okay, I'm like coding, networking. I want to get into cybersecurity because I think that's where the money is, but I don't really like that. I don't really. What I like is people building relationship. That's what really made me see how much I love people too. Is just being on the screen, just studying all day, just and you need that type of work ethic to do that type of stuff, especially if you don't enjoy it. Like you said, to be the first one in, last one out. So when I was really doing that, I learned that I like building relationships. So that's how I found out about tech sales. But I also, like you said, learned that work ethic that I can take with me to where, okay, I'm shoveling cabbage all day in a frozen warehouse for a place called Fresh Express. So I can do that all day. Why can't I make calls? Why can't I go hard at and doing other aspects? And then also when I was doing the IT, I was coding. And coding, everybody has different strengths and weaknesses. And for me, coding was not my strength. So just staring at the computer all day, having to be real concise and just get real detailed and technical, I wasn't really trying to do that. But as hard as I had to work to try to do that, I used that same effort and was able to transfer it to tech sales. So I love that you said that. Now, talking about that passion and that work ethic, a lot of my mentees, they come to me. One thing I ask everybody, I'm saying, okay, you want to get into tech sales on a scale of 1 through 10, how bad do you want to get in? You would assume everybody would say a 10, but you get a lot of 8, 6s. And a lot of the time, the reason is because they're unsure of the blueprint, the path they need to actually take to get that goal, or they're unsure in their self to be able to perform. Now, I think being able to perform is you get that from the work ethic of coming in early, leaving late. So somebody asked me the other day, they were like, "Oh, were you always a hunter mentality?" Because I told them it was a hunter road. I'm like, "We always a hunter mentality?" I'm like, and I actually told them a story of someone I seen on I think it was YouTube. They caught a big fish, and they're like, "Oh, as humans, we need to be eating in the morning. You need to do something productive to stimulate hunting." So I'm teaching, I'm like, you need to have a hunter's mentality because you like to eat, don't you? Need to eat to survive. So hunting is not something that I'm just like, oh, I'm just so happy-go-lucky and just so motivated. It's more of a discipline of, okay, I want to eat, so I gotta have a positive attitude. I gotta have a good mindset and stay consistent in my efforts of being motivated. So let's say somebody that they feel like they don't really have that passion, because this is what I told them. I said, you want to have the wisdom to be able to see what you don't want or where you don't want to be. You don't want to have to feel that struggle yourself. So, like you said, some people might have a family member pass away, they might hit rock bottom, don't got a dollar to their name, then the passion comes. So, what's your best advice that you could get? And another thing that I do is called the why exercise, the root cause analysis, where you go 7 layers deep into the why. So, that would be my advice as far as people that need to find out where their passion derives from and what really motivates them. So what would be your best advice for people who's like, oh man, are you have you always been a hunter? And they kind of one foot in, one foot out, just testing the water, and they're kind of scared. They just need some motivation, they feel like.
Sorry, just so I understand your question. Your question is like, what would be the advice I give for people who need more motivation?
Yes, or feel like because some people they feel like having the passion is like a gift that some people got. And you kind of said the same thing, like some people got it in them, some people don't. I feel like you cannot have that passion or be an introverted person or not. I like to call it having that dog in you, having some get up and get it in you, whatever you want to call it. They feel like they don't have that. What would be your best advice for people to that feel like they don't have the passion?
Hmm, that's a good question, actually. Um,
Appreciate it. And I know I'm catching you off guard with that one. I thought about it when you said it. I'm like, this just came up yesterday, so I gotta ask it.
I think people go into sales for a lot of reasons, but at the end of the day, no one goes into sales if they aren't motivated by money. And I know that sounds a little bit, maybe that's like weird to say, but you're in sales,
It's
so you
real.
should be money. Um,
Right.
Obviously, a lot of the aspects around sales, like, being able to talk to people, build relationships, all those things are great, but like you can do that as a pastor if you want, right? You can go, be a pastor, do something in religion, and be a community member. Um, and you can be around people and do great things. You can work for nonprofits. Um, but the reason why people go into sales is because they want financial freedom, and they want to be in a role where they feel like the amount of input that they put in translates to the outputs and the outcomes they get, right? So there are certain types of jobs where, like, let's say you're like an inbound customer success call center agent, right? Like, there's only so much you can do since you're just relying on inbound phone calls, and you don't have much agency and control over like how much money you could theoretically be making. But with sales, oftentimes you're doing a lot of outbounding and going and finding new business and winning deals, and a lot of that is going to be your sort of skill set. Um and so it's one of those roles where, unlike a lot of other different roles, you have the agency and the power, and you're in control of your own destiny, in terms of how much earning and income you're able to make. Not every role is like that. If you're I guess if you're theoretically like delivering pizzas, you can spend more time like delivering pizzas and make more money that way. Um, but sales is one of those like kind of jobs where how much effort you put in translates to how much potential earnings you get back. And so um, that should be, to me at least, a pretty motivating factor for people. Like the idea that you can be in control of your financial freedom and your earnings if you put in the effort, and you take the right sort of mentality, and you take sort of a learning mindset. Now, as to your question of people who understand that sales is a path to financial freedom, but need a little bit more motivation, um, I think that's a very sort of like personal. sort of like, framework that it's hard for me to be like, yeah, what motivates me is probably going to motivate you, right? Like I'm single, I don't have a family, and so needing to provide for my children and making sure that there's food on the table is not something that motivates me, right? But maybe for a single mother, like that might be a motivating factor. Maybe for someone who is like, yeah, I'm single, I don't have like children, but I want a nice house and I want to be retired at the age of 40. That could be a very powerful sort of motivating factor um, for people. So I guess the best advice I would say in terms of like how to motivate people, um, or how someone can be motivated, is to just kind of like really kind of like size up your own personal life, do some meditation and reflection, and think about where you want to be in 10 years and 20 years with your life. And if any of those things that you want to be in 10 to 20 years have anything to do with financial freedom and you know uh, a nest egg and a bank account that has money that you can kind of like rely on in the future, then then you kind of want to work backwards from there and be like, how much money do I want to have in my bank account? What kind of career do I want to have? Um, and work backwards. And you're like, well, I have to start now and kind of like build my way up towards that. And so being able to kind of think about your personal life from like a 5 to 10 year horizon, or even a 20-year horizon, allows you to kind of like start seeing the bigger picture. And then suddenly all these small things like, oh, I don't want to pick up the phone. All these things start becoming like very sort of like when your eyes are set on a milestone or a goal that's 5 or 10 years or 20 years out, suddenly all these like small things like picking up the phone or getting started and things like that just kind of start becoming like really easy suddenly magically, because you're like, well, I'm thinking like 5 to 10 years ahead. So how can this thing be like hard for me if I'm thinking 5 years ahead? If you don't really have a plan or a long term like vision, then small things start becoming like big things. Like, oh, I don't know, like I don't want to pick up this phone because like I'm nervous. But if you're like, well, I have a goal for myself and it's like 5 to 10 years out, then every small thing that you do day to day just becomes like a part of contributing towards that longer term goal. And as long as you have a long term sort of horizon for that, then these things start becoming easier. So that those would be kind of the kind of pieces of advice I would give. And the final thing I would say is, I'm not actually sure, like this is still like kind of a learning journey, and it's been a very interesting, almost like philosophical question, is like, are some people naturally sheep, and are some people naturally wolves, or can sheep become wolves, and can wolves become sheep, right? Like in sales, you kind of, obviously, like, you want to be a good person, and you want to develop genuine relationships with buyers and network and things like that. But the best salespeople I've found, I'm not saying advocating for being like an asshole or anything, but like the best salespeople, they have this like sort of like inner sort of like edge. You were talking about that dog in them, like um, that sort of thing that drives professional athletes the same way to become Olympians. Um, Guys in the league, they all have that sort of like thing that kind of makes them tick. Um, and it kind of translates into like what they do day to day. And I'm not sure, like maybe some people are better off not being in sales because they're not the type of person where they're actually looking for crazy amounts of financial success, or for them, they'd much rather live a happy, chill life, um and enjoy life, rather than kind of sacrificing a lot of things in the early days to build sort of delayed gratification, right? Some people prefer easy things now, and they have a good thing going on, and they have other priorities. Maybe they like writing, maybe they like movies, they have hobbies to pursue, and so for them, like, a job is just a job. Whereas other people are like, hey, like, my interest and my passion is my career, and really developing it and becoming the best version of myself that I can become. It's the same way some people like go to the gym and work out a lot, and they're doing it because they want to be the best physical versions of themselves. And some people don't go to the gym because they're like, no, like, I'll get a couple hours in, maybe I'll jog once a week, but like, that's not my, like, I'm not going to be like psychopathically working out because I have other priorities and things like that. And so, it's also an interesting philosophical question. Like, are certain people better cut out for sales than not? And so for me, like, kind of animals come to mind, like sheeps versus wolves and that kind of thing.
That's a great answer. And it was a lot of things that you said that I laughed at. So one thing that you said was when people would be like, "Oh, I don't want to pick up the phone." The reason that was funny is because I hear that so much, and this is the reason how you were kind of like, I don't know, it's a philosophical thing, and you don't know really knows the answer. I personally do agree that some people got different strengths and weaknesses, so different niches, and some people are going to be more comfortable doing certain things. For example, in my past role, I'm working as a VDR at a startup that sold quoting and estimating software. So being a VDR for this company, absolutely no product market fit, no structure, no sales, no VP of sales, no sales. Like you, they fired the biz development. You're literally a complete hunter. Everything sales source prospect and no scripts, no nothing. You just get it out the bud. So I was working that, and one of the software engineers, she's telling me, she's like, "Oh, I don't know how you guys cold call. Like, that is so hard. Like, I would rather like just ball up and never come out before I would just make a call." I was like, "No, it's not that serious." Like, I just so the way I like to think of it, what motivated me personally is coding. Well, I always was like, when I played football, my coach would be like, "Oh, Zuri and Tim Farga are the only ones that know how to work hard, are the only ones that know how to fight." That's what they used to say, only ones that know how to fight. So, like you said, some people got it in them, some people don't. I do agree with that. Because if they saying two people out of a whole football team got that dog in them know how to fight, I mean, the rest of the people don't naturally. But I do feel like some people can learn it, and I feel like it's a mindset thing. So for me, what motivated me was now, I do agree that some people shouldn't be in sales, and I feel like if you go 7 layers deep, say, why do you want to get into sales? Oh, I want to be an AE. Why you want to be an AE? Because I want to do this. Oh, okay. Well, why you want the money? It's gonna get to the money eventually. Then once you get 7 layers deep, some people are talking about God. Some people, like you said, is family. Some people want to be able to look themselves in the mirror. It's all different things that's gonna motivate people. But I do feel like once you do, so if you go 7 layers deep, I've had people, most people there be like, it's an obvious 10 once you go 7 layers deep. I literally had somebody that goes 7 layers deep and they're like, I'm gonna be able to help my sisters and my family and make sure they don't got to go through what I go through. I'm like, okay, so how bad you want to do that 1 through 10? Thinking for sure to be 10. And he was like, 8. I'm like, I'm like, but you don't care about nothing. You need to care. So if you like that, if you go 7 layers deep and you just don't care, you still like, oh, so how much you want to just not have a miserable life and be able to look yourself in the mirror? 6. That's when I would say, okay, just don't get into sales. But I feel like you said, that was great advice as far as just finding that passion. So getting back into Glencoco. So I was at a networking event one time. So like you said, it's a hunter's role. It's all about building a network, building relationships, building a community. So talking to a lot of people, healthy, strong relationships. I'm at a networking event and it was a lot of startup owners and I asked them a real complex question the way I broke it down. I'm like, when you started a business and you had to and I just was like asked a super complex question. He's like, next time a better way to ask that is what challenges did you have to overcome? So that's my question for you. With Glen Coco and starting it off, what were some challenges you had to overcome?
um, I mean, when we were first starting off, it was sort of articulating the vision, and being able to articulate the vision of what we're building in a way that is understandable to investors because we had to raise, money. Any founder who's raised venture capital funding has learned a lot about sales because they're basically selling to investors their vision and their pitch, basically, right? Um, and then also being able to kind of like explain the vision, so that people like you or other sales folks who could use and benefit from Glencoco could understand it, right? So really kind of crafting and thinking about the vision. I would say today our vision is we want to create a pretty interesting and global marketplace where people can sign up for Glencoco like the way they would sign up to be an Uber driver and find opportunities, right? companies looking for meetings, fractional sales development work, uh, opportunities to get hired full time by companies, in addition to just getting paid for setting up meetings on a fractional basis. Um, and then our vision on the company side is, for businesses is that they can use us as almost like an AWS kind of infrastructure for all things sort of sales related, right? So we built our own dialing system, our own email outbounding system. We built a lot of our tech IP from scratch, and so all that's kind of provided on our platform. And now we're starting to kind of upsell that to internal teams, companies for their sales reps, not just fractional sales reps to use. Um, so really being able to kind of like distill what we're doing and why we're doing it, and how we're doing it, into really clear messaging and kind of setting a long-term vision for ourselves. I would say that was one of the biggest challenges that early on, we had to go through. Now that we've kind of had that, um I would say the biggest challenge, um in a lot of ways, is for us, how can we find more reps who, you were saying like 7 to 8 layers deep. How can we find more people who get excited and passionate about sales development, sales, kind of cold calling, emailing, to use our platform, right? Because we we have thousands of contractors now on our platform. Some of them, like some people need a little bit more structure to be able to be efficient at their jobs. Like some people prefer, even though they'll never say like, oh, I prefer being told what to do. In reality, some people, I go back to this like sheep versus wolf analogy, like, um, Glencoco, because it's almost a double-edged sword, because in some ways, because it's so flexible and because it's like you can set your own hours and work whenever you want. The question is like, how does someone kind of self-motivate themselves to create their own sort of structure and process to, jump on Glencoco, make some money, make some dials, book meetings, the same way you could go and like be a DoorDash delivery driver or something like that. So I think our biggest kind of challenge is like, how do we motivate and encourage people? We've looked at the data, and the average hourly earnings are actually pretty high. I think it's like $35 an hour if you look at like how much time people are
Ooh.
spending,
Oh, yeah.
um, when using Glencoco. Yeah, but the question is like, how do you get people, when the hourly earnings are like that, to kind of stay motivated, and kind of use our platform without the kind of structure and the management and the overhead that typically most companies will invest in for their employees, right? Um, so I would say those are what I just gave was sort of like one historical challenge we faced at the very beginning, and now sort of today, what are the main kind of challenges we typically kind of work through as a business?
Okay, so if I'm hearing correctly, you said literally one of the biggest challenges that you face is finding people that have that excitement, that passion, that dog in them. So this is, I need everybody to pay very close attention to this, because I literally hop on calls every single day for mentorship calls. And it's the first thing I ask is, okay, how bad do you want it? Because I know it's the only thing that matters. I done seen people that's 18 years old, no experience, no college, and just did course careers, 2 weeks later job, because they were hungry. They were excited. Now, this might sound a little harsh, but this is my mindset of how I would approach it. The same way I said, okay, you gotta hunt because you want to eat. You gotta eat because you want to live. So literally look at it like it's life or death. Even though it's not, you could try and barely try and lollygag and just pussyfoot and just not get the job, and you'll be perfectly fine. Like, you could go work at McDonald's. You, like you said, you got two type of people: the people that are hungry, they're trying to explore and then you got type person that's just like, I'm chilling. I don't need to really go hard. Like, I got everything that I want. Like, I can enjoy life like this. So somebody that literally has a platform for SDRs, the biggest challenge that you come across is people that are motivated. So pay close attention to that. Now, when it comes to Glen Coco, and before I get into that, a lot the way that I explain it, you got two type of people. So that's the biggest challenge that you said you look for, and that's what I am, and that's what most BDRs are naturally. Is that's why they get hired, is because they are the type of person that's going to be proactive, go out and get it, be hungry, be motivated every day. When I got my current job, my old manager told my current manager, he said, Zuri the type of person that you're not gonna have to motivate every day. You're not gonna worry about having a that's the type of people that they want. So it's two type of people that you got. The type of people that's kind of like, I'm finna get into tech sales. I don't care what I gotta do, how long I gotta stay out, how many cold calls, how many video resumes, cold emails, voice notes, people I gotta add, network connections I gotta PowerPoints I gotta make. I'm doing whatever I gotta do to get into tech sales. Then you got a type person that's just like, oh, I'm just trying to, it looks cool, laptop lifestyle, and I'm just looking into it, and I'm just testing the water. Let me see. So that is the mindset that you need to have. So if you don't have that mindset, get that mindset not only for tech sales, just for life in general. So come talking about Glencoco, I heard you say that you want it to be as easy as signing up for Uber. So for people that might feel like they just assume it's a cumbersome process, or I heard you got an audition. So can you talk a little bit about how to sign up for Glen Coco, how smooth and easy it is, and then you get paid same day, which is amazing as well. Can you just talk about the actual process of Glen Coco, what it's going to look like for people trying to get into it, and how to get into it?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually going to share my screen and kind of show you how easy it is.
Okay,
So
perfect.
basically, this is our website, glencoco.com. If you click like become a fractional sales rep and you click apply to start calling, we actually post all of the openings we have in our marketplace here. So we anonymize the company names here, but you can basically browse if you go to glencoco.com/openings, see what types of companies and campaigns there are. You can see how much they're paying for a qualified meeting. You can kind of understand the job description of what types of skill sets and things you need. Like it's fractional SDR work, so it's going to be a lot of sort of like cold prospecting, outbounding, emailing. But you can basically read for any different company a kind of job description, how much they're paying per meeting. Typically, companies are paying anywhere from like $300 to $1,000 per qualified meeting. Um, but basically, at the bottom, the way you apply is you just upload a resume, your name, you fill out some information about yourself. You have to have a LinkedIn profile. If someone doesn't take the time to create a LinkedIn profile, then they're probably not serious about sales either. Because nowadays, like LinkedIn is a really important sort of platform for sales work. But it's really simple. You upload your resume, you post your information, and then you also record sort of an audio greeting here. So we like to hear your sales success story, what kind of experience you might have had. If you've only had course careers experience, then you can kind of list it here. But what we actually do is once you've submitted this application, we actually use AI to basically scan and screen different candidates like resumes and how they sound on voice. If when you're telling your sales story, if you kind of mumble, if you don't sound professional, then our AI will actually kind of detect that. We'll actually kind of like check your LinkedIn profile. And what we'll do is once you've uploaded this, you typically find out within like 5 minutes whether your resume and your voice recording and your LinkedIn profile is like a fit for our platform, because we use AI to automatically like give everyone sort of like a score, and also we do this to match different companies to people. So if someone has previous experience at working as a server or something like that, then they might be a good fit for companies that are selling like restaurant technology, because they know how to talk to like different folks. If someone has previous experience in cybersecurity, then we'll match them to companies that are doing cybersecurity. But the application process takes like 30 seconds. You find out within like 5 minutes, and then once you're inside the Glencoco platform, you're able to actually see sort of like what types of companies, let me actually load it up here, are listed in our marketplace. So you can see, let me just sign in with my own account. So you can basically browse and discover different companies in our marketplace, how much they're paying. You can basically set up your bank. You can create like your profile here. You can connect your bank account here for direct deposits through our platform. So we don't store your bank account information. It's also all handled securely through Stripe. But you log in, you create a profile, you connect with Stripe, and then you can basically go and find all kinds of different campaigns in our marketplace. So you can see like what kind of companies there are. You can basically learn about the company by reading going through like online courses and content that we put together for the specific company, what it does. We provide like call scripts, how to handle objections, qualification criteria. Once you've completed the training, you submit like sort of an audio audition similar to what I kind of showed you earlier, where you kind of record yourself handling certain objections, giving a pitch. And then once you're approved, this is where it's Sunday here, so you're not going to see leads, but we've built our own sort of like dialing platform here where you're able to actually, let me go ahead and 1 second. I'll show you a demo of sort of what the dialing system looks like. But we built a pretty cool. So you don't need to download anything. It's all part of like a web-based application. So all you need to do is just like log into your website, and then if you go to we generally provide sort of like lists, and then you can basically make dials on our platform. So we built our own sort of like parallel dialer. You can also like send emails on our platform here by we use you can use emails from the platform. You can basically book meetings from here. You can make calls from our platform. So everything's kind of provided all in one, so that you can basically everything you need to basically do the job is kind of all part of the website and the application.
Wow, that is amazing. I never actually seen the user interface of Glencoco, and it looks great. Amazing work. I appreciate you because when I was trying to get into tech sales, I didn't know about anything like this, and that's the reason I reached out to. Well, you actually reached out to me, and we're gonna get into that later. But I didn't have anything like this where I literally could know, like, okay, so I want y'all to pay close attention. This is something where is that easy to sign up. You can start working. You can put on your LinkedIn Glenn Coco, sales development representative. Then you can put bullet points of what you did, how you did it, what impact it had to the company, user numbers and metrics geared towards tech sales under each one. And now you have a fully optimized resume. And LinkedIn, you can do that starting tomorrow. So getting into a little bit about, like since you are the CEO of Glencoco, I know that you audition, so you're looking at certain things when it comes to candidates. Talk about that. What advice you could get for people to make that process smooth and easy, so they can get started right away.
Um, I would say, making sure you have a solid sort of like LinkedIn profile, uploading a resume that is focused towards like sales, because we're scanning all that with our AI, so we're trying to like understand you better as a candidate, see if you're a good fit. So making sure when you apply, putting in the effort to make sure you have a good resume, that when you upload it, in your audio greeting, a lot of cold calling, you're you know it's very cold calling like business to business is very different than cold calling like your friends or something, right? So oftentimes like you have to adopt a little bit more of like a professional presence when you speak. So you know not using like tons of slang or tons of like filler words like like I'm actually pretty guilty of saying a lot, and it's something I'm always trying to work on. But being able to project sort of confidence in how you talk, because we like to listen to how you sound and be like, if you were to be put on the phones reaching out to C-level executives or directors or pretty senior people at organizations, would they feel like there's executive presence and you sound like someone who's professional and polished and can talk to them, right? So if you sound very like you sound like you um dropped out of high school, for example, or you're using like like very like low sort of like education level, things like that, then companies and we'll sort of like notice that, right? So like, kind of working on like, because in sales communication, speech communication is one of the most important things. So really emphasizing like, do you sound professional? Do you sound polished? Do you sound articulate? Do you sound confident? Like those types of things, I would say, have a huge impact in kind of how your kind of like Glencoco profile gets built up.
Perfect. And so this question, take it with a grain of salt, but I want to ask about the differences between Glencoco and then the competitors. Now, disclaimer before I ask that, I don't know anybody that does what y'all do. I have had companies that reach out to me and they kind of look like a scam because they're trying to get you to work for free. It seems like it's definitely not same day pay and as complex, but also easy and intuitive as Glencoco and a great opportunity like that. So, as far as the differences between Glencoco and maybe some competitors out there, what would you say?
Yeah, so there are a couple differences. So let's define the competitors, or sort of alternatives, right? Um, you could be a SDR, or you could do fractional sales on Glencoco, or you could go work full time for a company and get hired. Um, and then the other option is you could work for, a myriad of different sort of outsourced lead generation companies, or SDR companies that help businesses, basically. So what they'll do is they'll farm out their reps for customers clients they work with and things like that. Working as a fractional Glencoco rep has both benefits and drawbacks. When you're working full time at a company, if you're a W-2 employee as opposed to a 1099 contractor, you typically get healthcare and benefits, healthcare plans provided by employers and things like that. Currently, because we're an early stage company, we aren't able to. I mean, down the line is something we're scoping in, but currently we're unable to provide like benefits and health insurance and things like that the way you would if you were like a full-time W-2 at a company. So that's sort of like one thing to consider when you think about Glencoco. Um, when you're a Glencoco rep, you're a 1099 contractor, which means you get paid, you're protected legally and all of these things. You have to sign a contract before you kind of like start using Glencoco, but there's drawbacks and benefits to being a W-2 employee versus like a 1099 contractor. Um, the other benefit and drawback is like it's flexible. You're setting your own hours, so you can choose to work as much as you want or as little as you want. Like we're not gonna like give you grief about it. So it's great if you're like, hey, I either want to like spend all my time using Glencoco, or maybe a couple hours a week using Glencoco in addition to my current full-time job. But there's drawbacks to that too, because like I mentioned, without as much like structure or some manager breathing down your neck, sometimes you might not be motivated to go and like make calls or use the platform the way you might in a more structured setting. And so, um, we provide tons of resources once you're in the platform. Like we have all these like communities that you can kind of become a part of, because there are all these like micro communities that form within Glencoco. But in a lot of ways, you have to be like pretty motivated and have the self-sufficient kind of agency to go and like hop onto the platform. Um, and then compared to sort of more like outsourced lead generation agencies and sort of like companies that farm out SDRs to companies, um, we focus a lot more on sort of like, sort of the infrastructure and in the application and kind of like the leads and the actual sort of like dialing and the emailing and the actual sort of tooling to help someone be successful. So you're going to have a little bit less structure and like management with Glencoco than you would if you were to work for a more traditional sort of outsourced, SDR agency or something like that. So those are, I would say, like the benefits and the trade-offs. Um, um, what else is there? Yeah, like you mentioned, we process payouts in real time as soon as meetings are marked as qualified. So, instead of having to wait until the end of every month or on biweekly cycles, we're able to process that out immediately. Sorry, I definitely kind of rambled a bit there, but hopefully that was kind of a holistic overview of sort of the benefits and the trade-offs of Glencoco. Yeah.
No, I definitely appreciate you hitting on everything and really expounding and giving an in-depth answer. So, as far as the healthcare and everything, that's no surprise. That's not really a drawback because my current company, just in tech sales in general, you get decent benefits. So it's such an emphasis than mine. They had a presentation in my current company, and they were talking about the immense amount of money that they had to spend and like the percentage of compared to revenue, how much on healthcare. And another thing that I liked when you showed us that presentation were the different niches. So like you could literally tomorrow get some cybersecurity experience within tech sales. And even how I just said, that's another thing I pay attention to is filler words. And a lot of the time you'll say it when you're thinking. So if you're thinking like to buy yourself time, I like that you talked about speaking at a high level, being compendious, professional. I feel like that's definitely something you have to focus on. When it comes to being an SDR or BDR, since you had more of a sales operations, and then you use your skills and did those three things that you talked about to grow, what would be your best advice to someone that's trying to get into tech sales without more of a formal background?
My biggest advice is the internet is your friend and LinkedIn is your friend. Um, Try to read and study as much about the space as possible. So watch, YouTube videos, watch, follow different like nowadays there's so many like sales influencers on LinkedIn, and a lot of them just regurgitate the same tired crap. But the point is that like a lot of the same tired crap is actually kind of useful. It's just that people say it over and over and over again. But there's a lot of actually really good resources if you're just starting out and kind of like following some like influential thought leaders in LinkedIn, watching YouTube videos, subscribing to different sorts of like newsletters, and just trying to become like a student of the game and learn learn what prospecting and what good sales development looks like. There's just so many resources now online around how to basically go about doing that. And then um I would say sort of like talking to as many sort of like sales development managers as possible. Like typically managers have a really good understanding of like because their jobs are to kind of like coach and ramp people up to become like high producing SDRs. So trying to network and talk to as many people as possible and just take notes, come into the meeting with like a pencil prepared and just like take notes and absorb as much like a sponge as possible. That's the key to quickly ramping up and being successful is just to have a super learning mindset and being as inquisitive as possible.
I love that. And you talked about LinkedIn. I was gonna save this for last, but I feel like this is a good segue to that. So LinkedIn, I got my first tech sales job from LinkedIn. I probably got most of my jobs from LinkedIn in life, or indeed more back in the day now. LinkedIn is expanding so much that I really don't. One thing I will tell y'all though is to submit your resume on Monster. I did have pipeline come in terms of jobs for Monster. But in terms of LinkedIn, I got my current job, my last job. I started my business on LinkedIn. I know a lot of your business pipeline comes from LinkedIn. I met you on LinkedIn. So talk a little bit about LinkedIn and your advice to grow on there as far as scaling and building your personal brand. And before you answer that, as far as my best advice, it would be four things. Number one, as far as growing your LinkedIn, number one, add 100 people every week. Now, who you're going to be adding is going to depend on your current situation. If you're trying to get a job, then you should be adding hiring managers, talent acquisition, VP of sales, business development managers, CEOs of companies. My second piece of advice will be to post valuable content. If you need help posting content, reach out to me at Larry Henderson on LinkedIn. And I got a lot of cheat sheets I can share with you as well as mentorship. Third one would be to network with people in person as well as on social media. You can do that to grow on LinkedIn. And then my last piece of advice is just to be bold and network. So, what would be your best advice for people that's trying to build their personal brand and grow on LinkedIn?
I agree with everything you said. Um, I think you want to be thoughtful and always tie any efforts you're doing on LinkedIn back to a business metric or a personal metric or an outcome. So what I mean by that is becoming an influencer on LinkedIn can be addicting. And the reason why it can be addicting is because you're like, oh, people are strangers from all over the world are engaging with my posts and liking them, and I'm kind of growing my online presence, and this is kind of cool and things like that, right? It's the same way on Instagram. You have Instagram influencers, and some of them do it because they're narcissistic. You know, they like feeling like people are engaging with them. They like feeling like they're putting on this facade of, you know, a perfect life, beautiful, you know, houses bling, like whatever it is, you know, that people post. But the people who are actually able to be successful, really successful as influencers, you know, on LinkedIn or Instagram, um, they're successful because they're thoughtful about thinking how this engagement and activity can then translate into something that I can monetize, right? So, you know, you might grow your presence on LinkedIn and your objective might be to get a job. Well, great. Then you should be asking yourself, are my efforts of growing and scaling a network on LinkedIn contributing to me actually getting an offer letter? And if your objective for being on LinkedIn and posting is to get a job, which means someone is sending you an offer letter that you can, then if you keep remembering that, then it starts influencing how you choose to spend your time on LinkedIn, right? Um, I have a great example of, like, I've actually seen a lot of people who try to be like LinkedIn influencers on LinkedIn, and a lot of them come from course careers backgrounds. And I feel bad for them because in a lot of ways, like, they're you can see that they're posting and they're posting a lot of similar content that sales influencers post, but you feel bad because you notice after 6 months, like, they're still open to work, they're still looking for a job. And I'm like, hey, maybe if you spend a little bit less time posting this stuff and thinking a little bit like, hey, if my objective on LinkedIn is to get a job, maybe I need to, like, instead of like posting publicly on LinkedIn, I just need to be DMing SDR managers so that I can get jobs, and spending less time and focusing on the vanity metrics and the public stuff and focusing on, like, having really deep sort of, you know, conversations and chats with SDR managers who are hiring, right? Um, so I guess all this is to say is, now, if you're like, hey, I actually, instead of getting a full-time job as an SDR at a company, I want to build like a community and monetize that community and build like courses and like things like that and pay it forward to my community, then, like, your LinkedIn posting and content strategy might be slightly different than someone who's using LinkedIn posts and content to get a job. Does that kind of make sense? Like, there's a subtle difference, right? But like,
Yeah,
if you're trying to get a
100%.
job and all you're doing is posting like the same regurgitated like SDR outreach type stuff, no one's gonna give a crap. But if your like objective is like, hey, I want to build like a community and like help other people, you know, and I eventually want to create my own courses, then your objective might actually be like, hey, you want to make as many like public posts as possible. But so many times I see people who post on LinkedIn who aren't really thoughtful about like their business objectives or their personal objectives or goals, and you end up, you know, with a lot of people who are basically just copying what all the other LinkedIn influencers are doing without actually having a purpose in terms of how it personally benefits them. So what I would say is be thoughtful about always being conscious about, like, what is the goal of this post? Is it so that I can get noticed by SDR managers, or is the goal of this post so that I can, you know, get noticed by people who would pay for my courses or content? Is the goal of this post, you know, and maybe as you go through that exercise, you're realizing, hey, why am I posting on LinkedIn if know if it's not leading. It might if my goal is to get a full time SDR job, and for 3 months you've been posting on LinkedIn and it hasn't like resulted in any conversions, a lot of people fall into that pitfall of being like, oh, this is what everyone's telling me to do, so I got to keep doing that. But it's like, no, you should think about it from a first principles basis and be like, hey, like, is this actually helping me get a job? And suddenly you might be like, oh, well, instead of just posting public stuff, maybe I should spend all my time on LinkedIn just like DMing, um, sliding into SDR managers DMs instead of just like publicly posting, because that's going to be this thing that helps me like networking get a job. So kind of being a little bit thoughtful about like why you're posting and what your business metrics are as you're posting it. You don't have to do it all the time, but kind of having that framework in mind can be very helpful in making sure you're not just posting for the sake of posting.
I like that a lot. And I like how you talked about kind of ineffective, like approaching it and kind of not being as effective. So one thing, I got a top sales voice badge on LinkedIn, and I got that from making the collaborative article post. And I had made a post one time and it got like 10 likes, which is a bunch on one of those. And that's when I actually got my badge. So when I lost my top sales voice or top sales development voice, I got my top sales voice like 2 days later with like 2 to 3 posts because a lot of people resonated with it. And what I said was, you got to approach it with grace and humility. You got to be experimental. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if it's working, stick to it. So that's kind of like what you just talked about. Like, okay, if you've been doing something for 3 to 9 months straight and it is not working, you obviously need to change something. So you gotta try different things, see what works, and if it's working, stick to it. So that way you don't have open to work 9 months later and you're kind of working in backwards. And that goes back to the ignorance that I talked to of I was a valet manager and I had an IT degree, wanted to get into tech sales, didn't know the steps to take to get into tech sales. Took me 2 years to finally like, okay, let me really like tighten up, focus on what I'm doing, lock in, and really see what path I need and the things I need to do to get here. Find out about course careers, this and that. Them 2 years that I paid, I could have been an AE, I could have been a head of sales by now. If them 2 years I didn't have to pay that ignorance step. So it's a lot of knowledge that people are gonna get from this video. Glencoco, they educated on it now. So you guys don't have to pay that ignorance step and you can take action now. So I want y'all to take action. So let's talk about like when you reached out to me on LinkedIn, what made you reach out?
I'm sorry. I think you cut out a little bit there.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask about when you reached out to me on LinkedIn, what made you reach out and what advice would you have to people like because people feel like when you're talking to people on LinkedIn, I've had people say like, "Oh, you just tell them what you want." I've had people that say like, "You want to have make sure you got a lot of pleasantries," but then just like cold calling, some people want you to be straight to the point. Some people want you to do a lot of small talking. So, what made you reach out first of all, and then what advice would you have to people that are like, "Look, I don't really know what to say to these people on LinkedIn. I don't know how to reach out to people."
Well, someone who says I don't know what to say on LinkedIn or how to reach out to people, I would just say like, look, the internet is your friend. YouTube is your friend. Like if you Google like how to reach out to people on LinkedIn effectively, just YouTube it. Like you're gonna get tons and tons of resources on how to go about doing it. So basically, I would say like the point is that like this is something that I think a lot of like sales reps, a lot of people I talk to who are interested in sales don't like really understand is like the internet is a very, very powerful tool. You can basically search anything you want. You can even use ChatGPT nowadays. Like, how do I write a good sort of like LinkedIn opening message? Um, so anyone who's like, I don't know how to do something needs to very, very quickly understand that the internet is their friend and they can kind of search things and self-teach themselves a lot of things. In terms of like why I reached out to you, obviously we're scaling our kind of marketplace, and so I'm obviously looking to reach out and connect with anyone who's in the SDR space and business development space.
Okay, perfect. So Last advice for the people. A lot of people say do the job to get the job. Now, people give a lot of general advice. That's the reason I ask you what you would say to reach out to people on LinkedIn, because people are going to say, oh, just make the calls. They don't teach you exactly what to say for cold calls. Now, some people don't need that high level breakdown. They can literally, I can say, go make the cold calls, and they'll say the right things, reach out to people, say the right things. So last piece of advice is do the job to get the job. And when I say that, the job of SDR, you're gonna set up a sales cadence, meaning okay, call on this thing, email, call, email. It might be something on LinkedIn. So that's the sales cadence. So you can set that up for hiring managers or the prospect. Okay, day one cold call, day two voice note on LinkedIn, day two connect on LinkedIn, day three cold email, day four cold call. Now this is all random, but my point is literally do the job to get the job to a T. You're gonna get a sales intelligence platform, you're gonna get people's contact information, you're gonna call them, you're gonna email them, put them into a sales cadence. Then once you get to the interview, you're gonna build a relationship with the person, be very humanizing and personable, sell yourself, make them like you. That's one of the biggest part that people don't think about is make them like you. This is a real person. Yes, answer their questions, but make them like you and perform. You're gonna be able to wow the interviewer and get the job and offer it. So is there any last pieces of advice that you might have had for people at any point in their journey right now?
Do your homework, I would say, is the most important thing. My grandma always used to tell me measure twice, cut once, which isn't something that my grandma came up with, but it's a pretty famous kind of saying, which is always like, before you cut a piece of cloth, always measure it twice and then cut once. And I think that's a very important sort of like concept where if you're going to be if you're doing an SDR's job, like take 3 minutes out of before you reach out to do the homework, like learn about the person, learn about the company that that they're working at. If you're trying to get a job, show that you've done a little bit of homework. You know, if if there's a job opening, then like do a little research, see if you can get a mutual connection to make you an introduction, see if you can reach out directly to the person or text them or give them a call. Like you'd be surprised how few people go out of their way to do a little extra homework and put in the effort. It's a little bit like dating, right? Like I think getting jobs, I think sales, there's a lot of parallels between networking, getting jobs, getting hired, sales, and dating. So when you're dating, like if you just show up like, you haven't bothered to kind of like do a little preparation, um, put in the effort, then it's going to show. And similarly, if the other person hasn't put in the effort, like it's going to show as well. But you lead to better sort of like connections and outcomes the more sort of like homework and preparation you're able to do. So the internet is your friend, and just kind of like get into the habit of like Googling and looking things up on ChatGPT and asking sort of like questions and preparing for things beforehand. And you'll be better off than like 99% of people out in the market.
Perfect. And I love that you said sales is like dating. So I'm gonna expound and reiterate on that because that's something that motivated me personally. One time I was on the phone struggling to make the call when I first started, and one of my teammates, SDRs, he was like, man, sales is like dating. And he kind of explained to me what he meant by that. But what I kind of got from it is it's all about your mindset and how you position yourself. So you wouldn't walk up to a woman and be like, oh, I don't really talk to women, but I wanted to give it looked really good. So I wanted to give it a chance. And I was just hoping I could please, like, finally talk to a woman. That's the same thing as being like, oh, I don't, I was doing engineering and I seen tech sales and it looked good and I was just hoping I could break into tech. So it's all about your mindset. Be positive, be optimistic, and have that dog game. Do the job to get the job. If you need help, reach out to me for any help within any step of the process, and I will personally mentor you. I hope y'all enjoyed this episode of Tech Sales Heroes, and we'll catch y'all in the next
All right. Thanks very much.
one. Perfect. And scene.